Good morning and welcome all. Thank you for taking the time to join our COVID-19 forum on K-12 public education, part of a series to assemble UCI researchers with Orange County leaders as we work together to address the challenges and find the opportunities in the wake of the global pandemic. I'm Stephanie Reyes-Tuccio, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Educational Partnerships here at UCI, and it's a pleasure to have you here today as we discuss our community's most pressing questions and concerns surrounding COVID-19 and the impact it's having on the K-12 educational system. But before we start, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the momentous nature of the time we are living in right now, where we have multiple compounding crises in public health, in justice, in democracy, and in race relations, all happening at once. So while this forum is focused on issues related to COVID-19, we know that neither educators nor students experience their lives in school or out of school in a way that is separate from the identities that they experience through their socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, or gender position. And education, as we know, is at the heart of all of these issues, the only hope of an equalizer of sorts, as imperfect as that may be. So it makes our conversation really important today. And whether we are speaking of food insecurity, mental health, access to technology, or any of the issues that we think we can attribute to COVID-19, race is always implicated. So I invite our panelists to feel free to articulate that connection wherever it's appropriate. So before the past few weeks, our attention was consumed by headlines about COVID-19 and its impact on education. According to Education Week, school closures have impacted at least 50 million public school students nationwide. In Orange County alone, nearly 500,000 students from our 615 public schools were affected. And both our K-12 public education and our higher education system was challenged in ways like never before, as we turned on a dime to reimagine what learning looked like from a distance. Teachers had to quickly transform the way they teach. Students had to adapt to new ways of learning and connecting with their teachers and classmates. Guardians had to take on the additional role of teacher as they continued to work or tutor their own children or teach other children. School administrators had to swiftly coordinate assistant programs, reevaluate policies, and make many tough decisions in the face of a lot of unknowns. And while arguably every industry across the board is dealing with the effects of COVID-19, I know many are anxious to know what the future looks like for K-12 education in Orange County and beyond. Well, of course, what's most pressing on everyone's mind is how we can safely and strategically reopen schools and ensure that students continue to learn. So today, we've assembled an expert panel to share insights on what we've learned thus far and what the next steps are. And with that, it is my distinct honor to be joined by a few of the dedicated individuals that have worked tirelessly in the wake of this crisis to ensure the safety, well-being, and continued academic growth of our young people. We are pleased to be joined today by Dr. Dan Cooper, Professor of Pediatrics and UC Irvine Chief of the Pediatric Pulmonary Division. He is the founding director of the Institute for Clinical Translation Science and the program director of the UCI Clinical Research Center. Dr. Cooper is also part of the Orange County Education Committee focused on reopening schools through evidence-based solutions. We are also joined by Dean Richard Arum, who leads UCI's top-ranked School of Education. As a national expert on student learning, whose scholarship has transformative impacts way beyond academia, Dean Arum has conducted extensive research on K-12 education, analyzing student achievement, gaps by race and school segregation and stratification, and the effects of legal institutional environments and school discipline. We're also joined by Dr. Al Mijares, County Superintendent of Schools for the Orange County Department of Education, overseeing all 615 public schools in Orange County. Dr. Mijares has a long and distinguished history leading schools and districts here in Orange County and as a national leader in educational policy with the College Board. And finally, we have Dr. Rigo Rodriguez, President of the Santa Ana Unified School District Board, a community leader and professor of Latino public policy at California State University, Long Beach. Dr. Rodriguez is a nationally recognized expert in community planning, action research, and grassroots leadership development. Thank you all, gentlemen, for giving your time and expertise today. If the past few months have taught us anything, it's that we must always ground and begin these discussions with some of the medical science surrounding the virus. So, although it's been difficult to keep pace with the rapid pace of discoveries about COVID-19 and its impact on children, Dr. Cooper, could you please start us off by sharing what we know today about how the virus is affecting children, both those who are healthy and those who may have underlying conditions or health disorders?
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for bringing out that we really need to relate this to other events that are going on in society. They're so interrelated. And indeed, many of the problems of opening the schools bring out the health disparities that we see and that have been exacerbated over the years. The salient point about how this virus is affecting children is somewhat ironic, in the sense that from a symptoms point of view, children seem not to be developing the severity that we find in adults, and particularly in older adults. And while that's great, and we're obviously fortunate that unlike epidemics and pandemics in the past, even influenza, for example, in which children are much more severely affected, the worrisome feature of that is whether or not children in fact are infected. And because they're asymptomatic, we don't necessarily know it. And because children in schools interact with each other in such a profound way and interact with school personnel and then go home and interact with their families, the possibility remains that children are a reservoir, as it were, for spreading this disease. And a great many epidemiologists and many of my colleagues who are experts in the infectious nature of this disease are really worried that when we reopen schools, and if we do so without thinking carefully and strategically about it, it could contribute to a second wave. Now, what we have seen throughout the world so far, and there have been a number of countries that have reopened their schools, is a mixed bag. In some countries like South Korea, France, Israel, and Sweden, there have been schools that have had to be closed because there's an alarming increase in the number of cases of COVID-19. In other schools, such as Denmark, this doesn't seem to be happening, and we can talk about exactly what the reasons are. The last point is there is a rare but clinically significant syndrome that is starting to emerge in children that's called the multisystem inflammatory syndrome, in which certain children, for reasons that we don't understand, become much sicker with this disease. It's rare, it's often treatable, but it's something that we do have to recognize as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And these facts are surely the starting point for the very difficult decisions that need to be made throughout the state and, of course, in the county in terms of when and under what conditions to reopen schools. Dr. Mijares, can you share what the criteria or guidelines are that the OC Department of Education is following to inform the reopening of schools, and what factors are being considered when you are making these decisions?
I just want to thank you and Alberto and these distinguished guests that you have here today. Some of them I've known for a long, long time, and I admire all of them. We have about 550,000 students. You mentioned the 615, which are our regular schools and our charter schools, but we have another 285 K-12 schools that are private schools and schools that we often serve as well. In terms of guidelines, we have a task force in place, and I'm happy to report that two of the individuals here on the screen, Dr. Cooper and Dr. Weiss, I think he's here, are part of the task force. We also have our healthcare doctor, that's Dr. Quick, and we have Dr. Clayton Chow, who is the new healthcare agency director. So Dr. Quick, as you know, is our medical officer. And Dr. Zahn, who also works with them, is part of our group. And then, of course, we have educators that are part of a subgroup, and all of our superintendents, all 27 of them, weigh in as well. So it'll have their fingerprints all on these guidelines. The fact of the matter is that right now we are using our best judgments as to how to form these guidelines. You probably know that the CDE and the California Department of Public Health have not released their guidelines yet. We also, with the CDC, we are looking carefully, obviously, at that document and that body of knowledge, which we think will help our practice. But until we get the final guidance from the other state agencies who are wedded to the governor's office, it makes it difficult for us to be more certain or emphatic. But the reality is that because every district is different, we know that the customization of these guidelines will have to apply here. Every board out there, the 27 boards that we have are duly elected officials. They work with an appointed superintendent. So my hope is and guess is that they'll come together, take the guidelines that we've established here at the county, and then customize them for their use, recognizing that some of the customization could be a little bit unique and obviously and maybe a little different, but you don't want to veer too far off the path that's been laid for us. It is exasperating. And you mentioned in your opening remarks that where else in human history have you found the phenomena, the plural of a phenomenon, coming together with COVID-19 and now the crisis that we have that was spurred on by the George Floyd, what I would call a public lynching, because he was asphyxiated. He died of having his neck strangled. In this case, it was a knee versus a rope. And all of us are appalled. It was bone chilling, blood curdling for me personally to witness that. I just couldn't see it anymore. So you understand the anger that people carry today, and there's no easy solution here. We in the public schools value equity. It's at the center of our classrooms. And we cannot do anything but that. That is a sacred principle. In fact, the public schools are designed to eliminate those barriers, and create the compensatory measures in the classroom that are going to help people overcome whatever challenges they personally have. But it's our goal to make all of them college ready and career ready and successful. That's our goal. And so in terms of what we're doing, we're trying to keep a number of things in place. For example, social emotional learning and development has to be part of this. The whole matter of civics, civility, how we get along, how we communicate with each other respectfully, that also has to be part of, I believe, part of these guidelines. In terms of the guidelines, yes, we want to make sure. I'm so happy to hear what Dr. Cooper is saying, because frankly, people, we live in a political world and our job is to keep our kids safe. If you ask parents what's the most important thing for you, they'll say the safety of my children. When we send them to school, we want them coming back just like the way they went. So that's sacrosanct. That's the first thing parents want. And we want to make sure that our guidelines are grounded in research, grounded in science. I tell the doctors on our committee, hey, I am totally beholden to you. I understand pedagogy and the classroom experience, but our MDs, our pediatricians and epidemiologists and psychiatrists, and those people have a strong voice here, and I think they have to lead. We're looking to them for help. We cannot do it on our own. We need them. So I think the fortification of this task force we have is so strong that I'm very optimistic that it's going to be good, and we're curating things so it will go into Canvas so that people can see it, and it'll be updated regularly, these guidelines and how they should be looking in the classroom, and hopefully they're going to be very understandable and manageable by the leaders in our classrooms so that it all makes sense. It's all relevant.
Thank you. You've hit on just a few of the many, many issues that have come to the surface. Social, emotional health, mental health of students, students' understanding of their rights and responsibilities as democratic citizens. All these things have been called into question. And so I wanted to take a moment and open up to anyone on the panel to discuss in particular the mental health and emotional support that you see students may be needing as we re-enter the classroom on some basis in the fall. Perhaps Dr. Rodriguez?
Well, and again, thank you for the invitation. As I was listening to both Dr. Cooper and Dr. Mijares, and the way you set this up to Stephanie, COVID-19 is like another storm, like Katrina, like Hurricane Maria, but that's at the pandemic scale now. But what has always been endemic to our society is structural racism and racial inequality. And so this storm is impacting populations differently based on privilege. And so in the case of Santa Ana, even before COVID-19, we already had and have had to deal with structural forms of inequality. And Dr. Mijares is very probably familiar with it since you were our superintendent for many years, and have admired you since then, continue to admire you now in your new role. And so it's in this context that we have been trying to provide the best educational opportunities for our students, and social emotional aspects are really prominent. And so on Friday, March 13th, that Friday 13th date is when we closed our schools, and we immediately entered into crisis mode, knowing that one of the needs would be around social and emotional support. So we set up a food distribution system immediately, 13 sites, and within 2 months we had delivered over 1 million meals because we knew food was essential, and it's essential to our mental health and our health. We set up hotlines, and not just around accessing health and human services for our families, but specifically a hotline for mental health. And through various communication vehicles, not just our website, not just our social media, but having our family and community engagement workers call families. So every single school was calling families to ensure that they were still connected to us, that we understood their needs, and that they were properly connected to devices and things of that sort. And one of the things I'll point out about mental health is this sort of not irony, but this kind of, I don't know if it's a contradiction, but on the one hand, we know that the mental health need is out there, but on the other hand, accessing mental health services is a problem, right? And so our mental health services hotline is available, but we have, we have family members who are also experiencing this, and so the ability for them to access mental health services from the county is fairly limited. And on top of that, all these other barriers. So it's a concern of ours, but we have really been trying to set up a system here that keeps us connected to families and be able to serve them. I'll say one last thing that, in terms of the reopening of schools, that, there are guidelines that we're still waiting for, but there's a difference between guidelines and principles, right? So we don't have to wait for guidelines to come down. We know that there's 4 basic principles that we're operating under, both for our crisis management and now that we're thinking about the reopening of schools. One principle is basically public health, safety. As Dr. Mijares just mentioned, we do work in education, but we really do depend on our epidemiologists, our public health folks to help us with that. The other one is quality education. We just have to do it in a different way and for the whole student, not just the academic piece, but also the mental health piece. So we can't be overwhelming our kids with a lot of work, but we have to just calibrate it just right, professional development, all of that. The third principle is equity. Equity. We have special populations. We already have, a large proportion of English language learners, families, right? And really the last principle that we're using is nimbleness, because we're going to have to be able to switch on and off, and I think that's going to be the new normal. And so those are the 4 basic principles that we're using, and we're collecting as much information on guidelines as possible, but no, we're not waiting. We have an innovation design team that's really kind of using this as a situation where we can transform how we operate as a district.
Terrific. Well, some of the issues that you mentioned, both mental health, access to mental health, and the food security issues at the tip of the iceberg as it relates to the myriad equity faults that this crisis has brought to the surface. So let's talk about how that is directly implicated in how students can experience distance learning. Dean Arum, can you share your thoughts on the impact distance learning may have on equity gaps and impact student learning across the board?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Reyes-Tuccio, and I think that's exactly the right question, thinking about how this pandemic and the need to move to distance learning is going to have dramatically different effects on students and communities based on longstanding patterns of structural racism and economic disadvantage that individuals and communities face. Why is that the case? Well, I want to remind everyone that with all the flaws and limitations of schooling in America, in K-12, the K-12 settings, as well as in higher education, including our own institution at UCI, with all those flaws and limitations, education is a great equalizer. What we know in terms of learning gains, while students are in school, gains are roughly equal. Unfortunately, what we also know is that when students are not in these settings, for example, over the summer, gains in learning over the summer can be dramatically different. And why is that the case? Not because, of course, students and families don't value and prioritize education, but rather because different individuals, families, and communities have different abilities to mobilize resources to support education. Access to technology varies. Conditions that support learning vary, again, due to longstanding patterns of structural racism and economic inequality in our society. And given these differences, we know that the best estimates have been generated from prior research on summer setback, that we can expect that there will be gains somewhere or losses in learning this year, somewhere in the magnitude of a half a school year to 2/3 of a school year. The losses most likely will be most pronounced in math. In reading, in some affluent communities, we might actually see some gains because students, in the absence of formalized schooling, in some homes and locations, will do more reading than is normal. There'll be domain-specific losses in math and science and other areas, but reading itself might see some gains in some isolated settings. But overall, we should be expecting losses of somewhere between a half and 2/3 of a school year, due to the absence of time in schools, the lack of time in classroom settings. And on top of that, also, let's be clear, individuals are facing incredible economic precariousness due to loss of jobs, loss of income, and loss of food and housing security. And so the estimates that have been derived from prior research on summer setback are likely, if anything, an underestimation of the extent to which in certain families and communities these losses will be even worse. So I want to say one more thing. Our country has been struggling over the past decades to address the equity gaps in education. We have made progress, albeit too slowly. One of my biggest worries about the moment that we're in is that all the progress we made over the past decades in closing equity gaps is going to be lost and set back by this historic challenge to our country, to our young people, to our students, our families and community.
Thank you. I want to pause on that particular point and unpack it a little bit more. So if the other panelists have thoughts about ways from their position we might be working to address that widening gap that we know that we're going to be facing.
I think that Dean Arum has really raised some points. I don't think as globally as he does, though I am certainly cognizant of everything that he said. I've worked in schools in my own research, which is about physical activity and how it affects growth and development and cognitive development, which is so important. But what I'd like to just to react to and agree with Dean Arum and Al and Dr. Rodriguez is that we also have an opportunity. And while I agree that we could set things back, maybe we could use this as a change point. And for example, I am so impressed, Al, I'm speaking to you directly, with your leadership and the leadership of the Orange County Department of Education. And first of all, welcoming people like me to in any way that we can to bring, knowledge and content to the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day of how do we reopen schools in a healthy way. The work of the Orange County nurses, the discussions that we've had, the healthcare agency suggests to me that there is the possibility that if we keep at this, we can really bring about the kind of change that Dean Arum and everybody here is indicating. I've talked to schools all over the county. We contrast schools like Sage or Tarbota Torah, which are private schools, which have, really large and beautiful facilities, with schools in Santa Ana. I've talked to the principal, Lisa Solomon, at Madison Elementary. What an amazing principal she is. She's been going out and delivering food to families because she knows that this has to happen, and the families are rushing out to hug her, and she doesn't want that to happen necessarily, but it's just absolutely inspiring to see that. So the fact that we've been able to create these collaborations where folks from the university are assuming our correct role, and Dean Arum has been doing this for years, and that is, we don't just sit here in academia, we have to get this knowledge out, and here's the situation what's happening. We also need to, recognize that the health of the children, it's not just the classroom. I'm biased because I think physical activity and physical education is really important. And one of our challenges will be to use PE in a really constructive way right now, to not allow what happens, and Dean Arum referred to this, in the summer you have this loss, you have the loss of gain in knowledge, but then at the same time you have a gain in weight because the kids are physically inactive. And I don't want to see this inverse curve, as this happens. I think that we should really think about the PE class as a way to really impart to our kids how to function in a physically distant world, how to be physically active, how to respect other people, how to, when they leave school, how to keep their social distance, but at the same time, tuning into what we all know is the joy of being children, the inherent joy that kids want to express and have. And we also have to recognize one of the things that is so challenging, and that I know that Al and the group are dealing with, is children with special needs. I've talked to the people from one of Orange County's charter schools, the TLC school in Orange, which is focused on kids with these needs. And, the physical distancing for a child with Down syndrome, for hand washing, means the teacher washes their hands. Physical distancing when the kids have to use the restrooms means that the teachers are there. And so folks like me should try to get the best knowledge that we can to provide the best possible routes for those teachers, many of whom are concerned. One more comment about the mental health. There's a great deal of concern in pediatrics about this concept of ACEs, or acute childhood events. And these are traumatic things like divorces or child abuse that unfortunately happen all too frequently. And we now know that these events can influence the health of a child in very material ways for the rest of his or her life. And I think what we're having is a societal ACE, both because of the George Floyd event and because of the pandemic. And we need to be concerned and dealing with kids that we start addressing and ameliorating this so that the long-term consequences are not irrevocable. I think it's going to be very, very important for us to do that.
Thank you. And I don't know if Dr. Rodriguez or Dr. Mijares wanted to add anything in terms of addressing the learning loss that we think is occurring.
I wanted to reflect on Dr. Arum's comments because I do believe that they very cogent, and that is that the students who need the most help tend to lack the resources. And given the effects of the pandemic, it's created this sort of the potential for a fractured education experience. And we know the research tells us that if kids have bad teachers for more than 1 year, 2 years, for example, it affects the trajectory of their ability to graduate from high school. I mean, this is a very serious thing. So I think the key, and the governor made these comments and the executive order that he delivered in early March, is that we have to look at online learning. It has augmented the classroom. And by the way, I will be the first to admit it has not been executed in a systematic, exemplary, professional manner across California. It just has not. And some districts do a great job. Other districts are just now starting with it. I know in cases where when the pandemic first hit and we got into distancing, that there were some people, because they thought, we're going to wait a couple of weeks to see if the curve would flatten. And a lot of people are just sort of like doing nothing. Now, fortunately, I don't believe that's been the case here because we have such outstanding leaders. But with online learning, you not only need the device, you need the connectivity. And we've had situations where, like in Santa Ana, where the hotspots are so necessary and everybody's at home drawing down on the power, so it compromises the ability for kids to use their devices and gain connectivity. So the point is, though, that right now it's going to have to drive the instructional program. We're talking about a hybrid model. When the kids come back, there'll be some student to teacher FaceTime engagement with peers. That hopefully will go on. And by the way, that's what we all want. And none of us want to be in this position we're in. We want our kids to go back into a classroom with a superlative teacher and their peer group and learn. We think that's the strongest model. But online education, e-schooling is an imperative. And we're right now working strongly. We happen to be using Canvas because it's taught universally. It's K all the way up to the university level. Our community colleges are all using Canvas, and we're using WebEx as the platform because we believe it's safer. And Zoom has been accused of data mining and things like that, or some security issues that compromise FERPA and other laws that we are faced with. So that's what we're doing right now. We're doing everything we can to make sure that our districts are fully equipped. We want to help them. We don't usurp their authority, but we want to enrich and help them. But I really think online learning is an imperative.
Dr. Rodriguez, did you have anything you would like to add?
Well, I echo Dr. Arum's real deep concern around equity, and also what my colleagues have said, certainly around special education, as Dr. Cooper mentioned, and also existing or lack of infrastructures around the digital platforms. So in Santa Ana, for example, 2-3 weeks ago, we bought an additional 4,400 hotspots on top of the ones that we had already purchased. And then we realized that there are these deserts within the city because there's a lack of cell towers. I forget the actual name of the device, but when you now have hotspots concentrated around a weak infrastructure, then everybody's speed decreases, right? And so that's part of the lack of an infrastructure that only adds more to the equity issue. So you can prepare very good online education, but without the infrastructure, it ain't gonna be delivered, right? And so we're dealing with those. But I also want to add another component to the equity issue that is really important to the district, and that is early education. How is a kindergartner going to experience her or his first day of class online? Think about that. Think about the governor's budget that slashes preschool, right? And so on top of everything else, families with young children not being able to have the infrastructure, or our infrastructure for early education dismantled with budget cuts. And so if our students, we had some really promising gains over the last 3 years using the early development index measures of literacy numeracy for kindergarten students. And thank you, Dr. Arum, because the faculty at UC Irvine, George Farkas, Carol Connor, may she rest in power, and Linda and others have been so instrumental in the work that we're doing locally. And now we weren't even able to collect the data this semester because of COVID-19. And so I'm just really concerned about the equity issue that's going to likely be impacting early education. And so then the gap is going to be that much more difficult to close. So I just want to add that so that it makes us conscious of that early education piece. And Dr. Cooper, I mean, physicians are at the front line with the younger kids, and 0 to 18 months, lack of infant and toddler care supports. So it's another area I think that maybe deserves another kind of focused conversation around how is COVID-19 impacting that early education segment.
Let's pick up on that. Dr. Cooper, you have written about how the community at large will need to view schools as healthy places for children and society, and that all of these pieces are part of a complex ecosystem of the school in the community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, first of all, there is the broader economic issue, which is, 40% of the American workforce has school-aged children. The morbidity and mortality of everybody staying at home is probably getting to the point where it's equal to the morbidity and mortality of the disease itself. And so we have to reopen society, even though there is risk, And I think that the parents who work and depend on their sense that their children are safe at school, i.e. that school is a healthy place, is absolutely critical if we're going to get through this successfully. And so we can't have school as a healthy place without the kinds of interactions that we're discussing here. And, I just want to point out that, as Al pointed out, we don't yet have the California Department of Education guidelines. We're eagerly awaiting them, but we kind of know that they're going to address issues that are going to be very, very challenging, so that the parents will consider school to be a healthy place. The last thing that we want to happen is for schools to restart, and then in an inordinate number of them, we see spikes in the number of cases of COVID-19, and then schools have to close, and that's happened in some countries, unfortunately, or that the school personnel themselves, the teachers, many of whom are older, are afraid to teach because they don't feel that the school is a healthy place, or the key school personnel, the people that work in the cafeterias, the custodians, who are going to be responsible for this task of disinfecting and hygiene, that they feel uncomfortable. And so we have got to put together the teams that we need to make this all work. And as Dr. Maharis referred to before, the guidelines that we have from organizations like the CDC, et cetera, they're great, but to implement them at a particular school with all of the particular nature of the neighborhood and the idiosyncrasies of the school is the real challenge. So, we talk about things like hand washing, for example. Well, in Denmark, the kids are washing their hands every hour. Now, is there scientific evidence that hand washing is the only way? We don't know. And we're not going to do a double-blind clinical trial where we have hand washing, we don't. But, as Dr. Maharis and Dr. Rodriguez and Dean Arum know, so how are we going to do hand washing in the schools? Are there clean sinks close to the classroom so that sending the kids out every hour or even every 2 hours is not going to cause more physical closeness than you want? Are we going to put into place the use of hand sanitizers, which are 70% alcohol, and what they're finding in Denmark, for example, is that some kids are getting eczema and some kids are responding not so well to that. Now, these are not insurmountable problems. These are challenging problems that we have to work on, but we have to work together so that parents, teachers, school personnel really view the school as a healthy place. And one more comment. I think everybody understands that we don't have all the answers. And I've talked to Dr. Maharis about this. It would be great if Dean Arum and I could say, if you do A, B, C, and D, the schools are going to be healthy places, the kids are going to learn, and we're not going to have any problems. We know that that's not the case. This is a novel virus. We don't know enough about it yet to be able to do that. I think that recognition is there. And Dr. Maharis referred to, and Dr. Rodriguez referred to the ability to update and the ability to be nimble, which means that people like us from the university have to work with people who are on the front lines so that as new data comes, as we learn from other countries, as we learn from our own experience, we're in a position to change policy in a really quick and correct way. And that means, Stephanie, the kind of partnerships that you referred to, we have to create now. And again, I'm so proud of Orange County. I'm so proud of Dr. Maharis and Dean Arum and Dr. Rodriguez. We've started to create those mechanisms where we get to know one another, we talk to one another, we trust one another, so that we're going to be able to address the changes as they occur as rapidly as possible. And that will contribute to the sense in the community that the school is truly a healthy place.
Great. Well, we've talked about the families and the communities. We've spoken specifically about the students. I'd like to turn for a moment to think about our educators and our teachers, because at the end of the day, there's the curriculum, but it's the teachers that are the connection between the learning and the student. So I'm wondering if any of our panelists would like to talk about either the challenges that you see educators facing right now, or what is being done or could be done to support them to ensure that they're really providing the most effective instruction for every student.
Yeah, so I can speak a little to that and circle back to a theme that Dr. Maharis brought up earlier around the use of technology to support education. New technological tools have been made available over the past 2 decades that have the possibility to greatly enhance and support how we provide education to young people. Educators have begun to adopt those tools over the past decades, but and districts have supported that, but a lot of that has happened very slowly, and for all sorts of reasons related to how educators were trained, to cultural assumptions about how education should be provided, and issues of lack of support around training, and that's from no fault of educators themselves. I myself am an educator, teach at UCI and have taught elsewhere, and I too have been slow to take full advantage of all the new tools that are available. It's very hard to find time to prioritize learning these new schools and deploying them. Now, one silver lining in this moment is that it has forced all of us, educators and districts, to adopt these new tools and techniques, and made clear to all the possibilities, the potentials, the opportunities for using them in the future to promote education in general and equity in particular. And so I believe that efforts now to in support educators, train educators to use these new tools will pay long-term dividends for the system as a whole. And I think that's the key piece to think about in terms of educators right now. They've acted heroically in trying to support students, trying to learn these new tools and technologies, while dealing with all these other pressures in their lives. It hasn't been easy. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude. But again, I think the more we train and support them now, places like UCI, our teacher academy, can help. Districts themselves are working on this. Will again pay long-term dividends.
Are there other thoughts on that question?
I'll just add two things. I think one is that, first of all, this was a shock. It's like you didn't have an option. We were just thrown into this. We had to do it. And so my deep appreciation for everyone trying their best. And in a crisis mode, it's a crisis mode. And so we all were just trying to do our best, but everybody was thrown into the deep and cold end of the pool, period. And I think then no one can say that you didn't at least taste, feel the water. It's there now. And that's where the silver lining comes in, that Dr. Arum brought up. And that's my second point. And that is, I think there's a couple of things there. That one is, it raises the question of who is an educator. And I think now more than anything, teachers and parents through this online platform have to see themselves as educators, because our parents need to know, like, think about that kindergartner. The parent is going to have to know how to support the child even that much more at the home, and have a vocabulary and a language with the teacher so that there's co-instruction happening. And I think that is a mindset shift that could be really, really powerful if we name it, if we cultivate it, and if we formalize it. Because in a lot of the work that we've been doing in early education, kinder first grades in particular, we've had to really help our parents see themselves as educators. And I think now it's like, it's a reality too. Now they literally have to look at the instructional packages and do that. And so professional development here ought to be not just for our formal teachers, but our parents as educators. And so if we think about that in that way, it really does amplify the impact that we can have on our students and with our students. And in some cases, it's the older siblings who are playing that role too. So I think the silver lining is there. We just have to be very good at naming it and supporting its amplification.
I wanted to add, I think I'm off mute, right? I wanted to add a couple of points, and everything that's been said just now is right on the mark. I've taken a few notes here, listening to my colleagues speak. Speaking of Santa Ana Unified, I talked recently with an elementary teacher, a kindergarten teacher at Lowell Elementary, who's been teaching for some 25 years. I was in the district when he first came on in Santa Ana and had been a teacher, I believe, elsewhere. But he said to me that this virus is making him a better teacher. Mm. And he said because, and by the way, he's a beautiful human being. People love him. He's one of those teachers that, just makes the classroom come to life. And he has stayed in kindergarten all this time. He doesn't want to leave kindergarten. Mm-hmm. He said he's doing an online activity. He's grouping his kids for strictly logistical purposes, but he's grouping them in groups of 6. And he was telling me how he's engaging the students and keeping them, going through the curriculum, and how it's forcing him to grow in different ways than he has before. And that really, lifted me up. It was very inspirational for me to hear him. So you have to believe, if we're teaching our kids to be resilient, growth mindset, to be resilient, to have grit, we have to teach them how to handle these issues that happen in human life that are unpredictable. We didn't cause them, but you have to deal with them. And teaching is hard enough without the pandemic. We know that many of our young teachers leave within the 5 years. There's a whole exodus out of public education or any education. And a lot of it's not because of the money, it's because they don't get the support they need. And I'm happy that Dean Arum has his academy and that, making a huge contribution to us to fortify our teachers. So I think we have to remember that after all is said and done, it's the teacher. It's that dyad between the teacher, or triad, the teacher, the student, and the parent, that makes the difference. And the rest of us are there to remove the bottlenecks and to empower and help them. So we do have, Dr. Cooper mentioned this, we have a number of our teachers that are beyond the age of 60. So you have, let's say 25%, 25% of them are, so they're already in that at-risk category. And naturally they're concerned that if we send them back too fast without really, having these guidelines and these practices in place, that we'll do everything we can to perhaps not eliminate the risk, but at least minimize it. And we're already in a teacher shortage in America. And here in the last thing I saw a few months ago, Dr. you probably have the latest statistic, but we needed like some 10,000 teachers to keep pace, because a lot of the baby boomers are leaving education, they're retiring out. And a lot of people have decided early on they don't want to go into teaching, So there's a crisis. But those who are here with us now, I think we have to be very sensitive and kind and gentle with them and help them. And let's not be critical of them. Let's help them, because the job that they are doing for America to sustain this great country is it's irreplaceable, phenomenal. And I do get a little concerned when I've heard people, it's beyond satire, but they'll make comments about, they're enjoying being home, and they're having a break here, a long break. Come on, we got to get back to work and revitalize everything. And I understand that dynamic. I just can tell you that the teachers that I know, they're lamenting the fact that they can't be with their students. Teaching is a character profession. They feel it's a calling, and they believe this is where they need to be in life, and they want to get back in that classroom, but we have to make sure that they're safe.
Absolutely. And I think one of the unintended outcomes for parents who have felt that they're at home with students and becoming the teacher is hopefully, and in many cases, a newfound appreciation and respect for the incredibly difficult job that teachers do with not just the one child, but with a classroom of 30 or 40. So Dean Arum mentioned this, and I think just selfishly for my own mental health, I'd like to end on a note of optimism. So I would like to throw out to all the panelists to consider ways that this crisis may be an opportunity to make some much and long needed changes that support better educational outcomes for all students. So the silver lining that we may see in this.
Yeah, I really agree with that point. The school is a healthy place. So from my myopic point of view, just as we talked about the educational opportunity, there's a health opportunity. We've got to fix certain things like health information that goes from FERPA, which is the school-based health information, to HIPAA. We've got to get the physicians, the nurses to talk to each other more about the health, and we have to be able to transition data, and it's going to be really critical in the months to come as we will identify the occasional child or teacher that may be symptomatic or have COVID positive. We've really got to get over those things. And in doing these very detailed changes, hand washing, social distancing, I think it's a shot in the arm, pardon the expression, for all of us to really make school a healthy place, as well as the kind of really wonderful educational goals. I think these two things really go hand in hand. And the silver lining, as we said from the beginning, is look at this group of people that we have here talking with one another and, you know, working together. I think that this is what's going to sustain the longer term change that you refer to, Stephanie, that we're going to need in years to come.
There's, I think the biggest impediment that I've seen to making changes in our school district and organizations more broadly is not the external stuff, but really our own culture, right? This idea that the task is just too big, we can't do it, everything depends on others, and so on and so forth. But I think what I see here is a shift in the sense of urgency and the sense that we didn't have an option and we still got it done. In other words, it's almost like we're surprising ourselves by the fact that we pivoted on a dime and we've made decisions. And I think one of the silver linings is really around, this may seem esoteric, but it's really around our governance structures. I have to just commend my fellow board members, the superintendent, our cabinet, our collective bargaining units, of being able to cut through the BS that we sometimes put in front of ourselves. And I think if we can sustain that more collaborative governance with multiple stakeholders working within and outside the school district, so that we're also working with the city, the county, and others, I think that's the part that really is what is in our control. It's in we can influence how we work with each other around the urgent issues and making changes. I feel like the changes we've made, it would have taken us 2-3 years to barely even get to them. Shifting onto an online platform, we've been talking about that for so many years. Now we're here, right? So I think that to me is was the silver lining.
Yeah, so I think our society and our schools can dramatically benefit from kind of a moment where they're forced by these exogenous shocks to reconsider business as usual. And let's remember what business as usual looked like in our world. Prior to the pandemic, each year we were burning increasing amounts of fossil fuel that in all likelihood would have made our planet uninhabitable a few generations from now. Being forced to slow down travel, commerce, a business for a moment, to think about, to allow an opportunity to rethink what's necessary in terms of travel and what is not. I think that's a welcome moment. I think in terms of an opportunity to rethink how can existing tools be better used to help support teachers and families educate young people. It's a welcome opportunity. And then finally, I'd like to say, to come back to where Dr. Reyes-Tuccio started, this moment is intertwined with the Black Lives Matters movement. And so we've also been a society that's tolerated structural racism and growing economic inequality for decades. And again, having a moment to think and reflect on that as a society, that is not something we need to live with, that it's not something we have to accept. We don't have to be complicit in these patterns, but we have an obligation to stand up and attempt to address and remedy those challenges. Again, I think we should see the opportunity there and the silver lining in these moments.
I appreciate that. And I want to say thank you so much to this entire group. Did you have a final word?
Just quickly, to me, I heard this notion that every organization has now become.
Dr. Maharis, I think we lost your video, and
okay.
So.
There. Okay. Every organization has now become a startup organization. And it is forcing us, this crisis is crystallizing what's most important. And I think, Dr. Arum, you referenced this. What is most important? And I think it's helping our society to recognize this. Race does matter. Inequality matters. The needs of our students and their safety matters. And I think that we have to now reorient ourselves. And because we're such creatures of denial, we deny reality every day. I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but the weight of what we're experiencing now has captured our attention. This is the one thing that is making us realize, and myself included, when I look in the mirror, hey, I have to change. I have to change. I can't keep going through the way I'm going when there's suffrage. There's kids out there today as we speak that they don't, we have motel kids. We have homeless kids all over the place. McKinney-Vento, we've got thousands of homeless kids. So can we be taken from our comfort zones and get out there and really meet their needs? I think that this virus is a wake-up call.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. You've given me a tremendous amount of hope and optimism, in addition to all the valuable information. So on behalf of UCI, we look forward to continuing to work in close collaboration with our community partners to support the learning and well-being of the students and families in Orange County. We are proud to be your community resource, not only for clinical care, but for education and information you can rely on. So for more information about the virus, our response efforts, and how you can stay safe and healthy, please visit our free online resource at oc-covid19.org. Thank you for tuning in.